Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the case of the Linz Sisters. This case was suggested by Kate Spencer, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions you guys have. I'd just like to let you know, no disrespect to anyone I'm going to talk about today. I've just gathered this information off the internet and compiled it into a video for educational purposes. If I get any of the pronunciations wrong, I do apologise. I try my best with them. Sometimes I really do struggle. But the case of the Linz Sisters occurred in Gramstatten near Linz, Austria, which is actually where the name of the case came from, because their full identities were never actually revealed to the public. This case began when the girl's mother, Ingrid L., aged 53, and father, Andrea M., had a divorce, and their mother actually won custody of their 3 daughters. The mother actually did suffer a mental breakdown following the divorce, and she actually went on to convince the girls that their father was this monster and that they were to avoid him at all costs. The girls Victoria, Katerina and Lisbeth were 7, 11 and 13 at the time, and that was when their mother kind of began keeping them at home a lot more. She wouldn't let them go out to school, and obviously after convincing them that their father was this monster, they didn't really want to go and visit him either. They didn't want him to see them because they were under this kind of impression and were kind of brainwashed in a sense that he was just this horrible, horrible man. So that kind of inclined them more to stay in as well. She would take them out of school saying that she wanted to teach them at home, but she never actually did. Instead, she would keep them hidden in their room with literally one light bulb. Even though they were frequently absent from school, they did actually take part in kind of these school events. Elizabeth took part in them until the year 2000, Katerina until 2003, and Victoria until 2005. The girls were actually isolated for a total of 7 years, from 1998, and the house in which they lived in was in kind of this smart, upper middle class suburb, which I guess really nobody would kind of expect anything untoward occurring. You just never truly know your neighbours. The conditions that they were living in was horrendous. The house was very squalid and filthy. It had no running water, so as you can imagine how filthy these girls must have been, because they just weren't able to shower or anything like that, keep up their personal hygiene, because they didn't even have running water. It was also filled with waste and excrement, which was literally a metre high at some points. The floor was so full of mice urine that it had literally corroded right through it. And that is just horrendous to even imagine. How disgusting those living conditions must have been for the mice's urine to have corroded through the floor. How could anyone live like that? It must have just been rife with all these diseases and all sorts. It was also reported that as their mother kept them prisoner, she was kind of the only one that they got to speak to pretty much apart from each other. And they went on to develop their own language. It was described as kind of this singing form of German. I've also seen some reports that state that that was untrue, so take that with a pinch of salt, but most of the reports do actually say that they did kind of have their own language. It's just that the reports are contradicting. The girls weren't ever given any toys or anything like that like you normally would a child, so the only thing that they could play with were mice. The girls literally did not see the light of day for 7 years. The mother used to make sure that all of the blinds were shut. She literally pulled out every single bulb in the house, apart from the one that was in the bedroom. So as you can imagine, their skin was just so pale. And in fact, when they were eventually freed, they actually couldn't handle light. They couldn't handle the sun. They couldn't even handle artificial light because they just weren't used to it. They were just used to being in the darkness all of the time for so many years. It just must have been so awful for them to just live like this in the squalor and in basically complete darkness. It's just sad. It was actually said that their mother was summoned to court 9 times. So their father and neighbours were putting in these complaints against her, but officials never really found a reason to look into it more closely, which is just completely out of order. The girl's father was actually a local judge in Linz, and despite these court appeals, he was fighting to see his children. He was never allowed to see his daughters, not once. I found that their mother actually escaped like these child welfare visits that you should normally have because she was a lawyer. When their father tried to see these children, which he did, he tried often, she would just simply say that they were ill or out visiting the grandparents, something like that. And that's just how she managed to kind of keep this ruse up. And as I said, the girls didn't want to see him anyway because they pictured him as this monster, and she twisted them against him and brainwashed them. Victoria, Katerina and Elizabeth were eventually rescued from their mother's prison in 2005 after police broke into the house. And this only happened because a neighbour, who had reported this on several occasions, bearing in mind, along with many other people, actually threatened a local council with a lawsuit. Initially, details of the case were actually concealed until 2007, and this was to avoid the massive media attention. And when it did actually hit the Austrian media, they were shocked by it. These revelations were just insane because not long before that, they'd actually had another case of the same kind of thing, which was revealed about this woman being kept a prisoner in her own home by her father, I believe. The three girls went on to attend a specialist therapy centre after this ordeal. One of the therapists, Waltraud Cabela, who actually treated the girls, stated that their psychosocial and their physical development was catastrophic. The eldest child at the time was actually said to have been doing very, very badly. And he thought at the time that she had no prospects of recovery, which is heartbreaking. She was seriously undernourished and practically anorexic at the time of her release. And the two younger ones would need years and years to overcome their ordeal and to come to terms with just this horrific childhood that they'd endured. The staff even went on to say that in the first weeks of their release, they were hiding under a bench in the kitchen, obviously in the therapy centre, because that was the darkest spot in the entire place. They just couldn't endure any light. They'd not felt sunlight or fresh air for so many years. Even after a year of therapy, the oldest daughter, Elizabeth, was said to have been so disturbed that she only stood on one foot for long periods of time, and she would just stare at the floor, and that she would often just burst out into tears. She and her two sisters would reportedly finish all of their sentences with the word "but." According to her carers at the time, the youngest of the three, Victoria, was soon to be discharged from the medical centre, having endured all the therapy, and she was going to go ahead and join her father, who, after this horrific ordeal, was in contact with the girls constantly. A council official stated at the time that the authorities were completely unaware and they didn't have any knowledge of the totally catastrophic conditions that these girls were living in. The mother was held in a special remand prison for the mentally unstable, and she was due to go to court to face these charges of grievous bodily harm and torture, and will possibly face a sentence between 5 months and 5 years in prison. In November 2007, their mother, Ingrid L., was found guilty of child neglect by the state court, and she was sentenced to an indefinite detention at a facility for dangerously disturbed offenders. The Supreme Court overturned the conviction in May of the following year and ruled on October the 26th, 2008, for the mother to be released. The court psychiatrist actually testified to say that she posed no danger to society, nor would there exist any danger of her committing these acts again or of a similar nature, given that she did not or never would have custody of her children again. This case was just so horrific. Not only did their mother suffer from these mental health issues that would result in her daughters living in squalor, and some were just unable to function because they'd been pulled away from society, from socialising, from any education whatsoever, and were just forced to recess into this darkness. Oh, I can't imagine how awful it must have been. It was said at the time that these girls may never recover, at least some of them may never. Obviously, this case happened 15 years ago now, so I'm unsure whether the sisters were actually able to recover to lead a typical life, or whether this experience was just too much for them, too scarring mentally and physically, that they just simply couldn't recover. The main concern would have been Elizabeth, because at the time she was described as being the worst one with all of her issues after the year of being in therapy. So obviously I don't know what happened on that front. I've tried to look into it, and if anybody does know, please let me know in the comments, but I just couldn't find anything. I do genuinely hope that they were all able to kind of recover and sort of live their lives free of this horrendous childhood that they had to endure. Obviously there's going to be scars and things like that, but I just hope that they were able to recover enough to just live their own lives. But yeah, if you guys have any more suggestions, please do let me know. I'll look into them for you. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for similar content. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the case of the Linz sisters. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.